Today, I'm joined by Kiara Jade, a holistic relationship coach, couples counselor, podcast host, and the author of Navigating Conflict. Kiara's work focuses on helping people heal toxic relationship patterns, reconnect with themselves, and learn how to build healthier, more conscious love. Through one-on-one coaching, couples work, and her online content, she's helping people navigate attachment, communication, emotional healing, and conflict with more self-awareness and compassion. I'm really excited to dive into this conversation today because her perspective on relationships is incredibly grounded, honest, and transformational. Please enjoy. Kiara, thank you so much for being here. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. It's been a good day. I've just been down at the beach, kind of like regulating and sitting in the sand and being in the rain 'cause it's been very wet today as well. But yeah,
Amazing. You're one of those who enjoys the beach even in tougher weathers. I love that.
would make sense. Hey.
Yes. I know you've got your hands in many pots, very talented and very well spoken. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a holistic relationship counselor. I'm also a podcaster. I'm also a public speaker. I wear many hats and I love to do many things, but essentially everything ties back into relationships and self-worth. That's my bread and my butter. I absolutely adore helping people nut out what their relationship pattern is and what their part is that they're contributing to that and what their partner's part is, and then like how to actually work through that and either break the cycle, I suppose, or decide to move on from it. And a lot of that comes from lived experience of my own kind of experiences with relationships. Like they say, your greatest wound is also your greatest kind of medicine for this world. And I would definitely say that's true for me. I've just known in my heart ever since I was young, I really wanted to help people. And I was like, I don't know what that means. And I've just like tried all these different ways of helping people. And I've landed on, I just want to help humanity raise the vibration of relationships. Like I think we're really struggling at the moment as a society in relationships. Like 50% of marriages end in divorce. People just really don't know what they're walking into, I think, in long-term relationships, of like how much shadow work that takes to actually work through, how much looking at themselves and their own patterns and their childhoods is probably going to come up, even if you take a long time picking your partner, even if you try to pick the most healed version of person you can find. I think there's always something that's going to come up. Relationships really are a big healing journey for us. I like to think of it as like, if you asked a bunch of people, like, who wants to do the really hard work of looking into themselves and like working on their wounds and their shadows and all this, like, no one's going to put their hand up, or maybe one really brave person will. But if you say, who wants to get in a relationship, everyone's going to jump into that, right?
Yeah.
And they're not going to realize that it's the same thing.
Wow. That's powerful. You're actually so right. Wow, way to say that. Let that simmer in, everyone. Yeah, doing the work is being in a relationship. It's so your biggest pain and then also your medicine for the world. Can you tell us when you kind of recognized that this pain, like how do you identify that what you're going through in relationship again and again? How do you recognize when that's actually pain and when it's good? How did you start to recognize that you had medicine for this problem?
Yeah, I think it first all started when I was 15. I had an abusive relationship as my first relationship. So it was like my only idea of what a relationship was. Like, and I'd seen my parents' relationship, they had like a childhood sweetheart kind of scenario. And I thought that was going to be the same for me. And I ran into this relationship thinking it was going to be great. And it just wasn't. It was completely and utterly the opposite. And then I walked out of that and I was like, what just happened to me? Like, I have no idea what happened, like why it went down that path. And I was just very lost and confused. And honestly, I suppressed a lot of it. I was 15, like I was so young. I didn't know how to handle big emotions. I didn't really have any strong people around me who I could feel like I could hold, like share that with. So I just suppressed for like 10 years. And I got to about 25 or something. And I really wanted a partner and I really wanted a healthy, happy relationship. And I just found that I was going out to the clubs and stuff and just attracting all these like not great people to me constantly. And I was like, I don't understand why this keeps happening. So I'm someone who always asks why. And I think that helps, like that curiosity, instead of just kind of jumping. I think a lot of people jump straight to blame of like the world is screwed up and like people are terrible and, you know, men are horrible. You hear that a lot. Whereas I think because I'm always asking why, and often with a self-development lens of myself of like, what is it about me that is attracting this to me? Not necessarily in a victim blaming way, but in like a, why are they going for me? Like, what is it? Do I have a sticker on my forehead saying, please, horrible men, come to me? Like, what is it? Like, I need to know. And I obviously have a psychology background and that kind of thing. So yeah, dug deep into that and kind of learned I had a lot of like patterns or, things I just wasn't really good at, like holding boundaries and loving myself and, saying no to red flags when they were obviously apparent or even knowing what they were, like things like that. There was just a lot there that I hadn't worked through to be able to get and hold that healthy partnership. And so I started doing the inner work and trying to like unravel all of that. And of course, it all led back to my abusive relationship when I was 15 and having to face that and actually look at it instead of just hold it and ignore it for years. And that's kind of how I started on my journey of healing that wound. And then once I kind of got through that and I actually managed to get a healthy relationship, I was like, okay, like I can take my greatest pain and I can transmute it into like love again. It takes a lot of work and it takes a lot, like, it's not just going to be 2 minutes like this conversation, but like, I think that's one of my greatest skill sets is to be able to see the patterns and kind of pull myself a bit out of them. So I'm not fully in them and work them out. So then I can kind of go back and sit with the emotion and kind of clear it. So it comes to a point where I feel a bit more safe and comfortable to move forward. Yeah.
You've obviously learned a lot since you first started dating. What would you say is some of the biggest things you've recognized or learned since your first relationship?
Yeah, so many things. But I guess the first one that comes to mind is like how well you navigate conflict is how well you do relationships, really. If you can have an argument that doesn't just fly off the handle and go into like crisis mode where everyone's screaming and crying and it's like all elevated, if you can actually manage your own triggers within that to hold space for the other person, which is a really hard thing to do. And sometimes we do, everyone loses it at some point. But if you can actually come back and have those conversations in a more lower key way, we can actually find resolution. We can actually move forward. And conflict can actually be used as an intimacy tool because when you have conflict and you resolve it well, then everyone feels more safe and more comfortable. And yeah, it brings us together. So I feel like doing conflict well and being able to work through your own stuff when you know you're getting triggered and be able to hold space for the other person in that is like a gift. And I think it's a yardstick for me of like how well people do conflict. Like people are like, oh, I'm going to move in with my boyfriend. Like it's only been 3 months. And I'm like, have you had a fight yet? Like that's my number one question of like, you need to see what the worst looks like before you jump into these big decisions of like, joining a household or something.
Yeah, that's really big as well. I think that's good information for anyone listening. Like, if you're getting really excited about your relationship, that's really wonderful. But yeah, see how you deal with conflict first. Do you think there's a a right and wrong way to deal with conflict, or is it really dependent on something beyond doing it well? Is it possible to make mistakes or to not be perfect every time in conflict, but still be able to meet your match or find a partner that can work with you, even if you're not doing it well or handling it well?
Definitely. I think that you can definitely make mistakes and repair. I think it's all in repair. If you like, there's times where you just get so heated emotionally and you're just like, whoa, I cannot have this conversation right now. And I am such a big proponent of like the walk away and come back when you're a bit more calm, when you've processed, when you've kind of like worked through it yourself. And then you've got your key points of like what you want to say about that situation. I think the problem is most of the time people get really heated, they leave and they never talk about it again, or they try to avoid it as much as possible. And it's like, that's just going to come up again. But if we come back and we're a bit more calm, and I think the key point here is self-reflection. If we can go away, self-reflect on, okay, what our partner's done, obviously that's going to be something we're focused on, but also what our part to play in it was. Like maybe it was a miscommunication. Maybe you said something and it got taken a certain way and it might have been completely wrong the way it was taken, but is there a way that you could be more clear in your communication than if this was to happen again? There's always going to be something that conflict is a cycle. It's not a one-way street. There's always going to be something that each side can do to break that cycle. And I think the ability to self-reflect on what my part was as well as what my partner's part was is critical, because then that means we're not just running in and blaming each other. Because if it's like, you did this, you did this, you did this, and I get it all the time in couples therapy, people walk in and go, fix my partner, they're the problem. It's like, okay, but what are you doing as well in that cycle that is kind of contributing to this? Do you just leave and avoid and then we don't talk about it for 3 days? Because that's also something that we can work on to kind of challenge and change that cycle so that it's not as hard to actually have these conversations the next time round.
And that must be really helpful to have a coach through this, because I know it's easier said than done. And when it comes down to it, it can be really difficult to find that bridge of communication between two people, especially when there's emotions involved. Could you
Yeah.
help me understand? Like, I'm hearing what you're saying, and I'm sure that people listening might be able to relate to what you're trying to get across. But how do you know if you're working with someone who wants to work with you as well? Because I know you mentioned you have been in abusive relationships in the past. So what is it that really goes wrong in abusive relationships, or is any relationship that you guys can't find a way to communicate or bridge that communication considered abusive or toxic, or is there a difference?
There's definitely a difference. I think it comes down to rigidity a lot of the time. Like, is one person saying that I'm right, you're wrong? Like, or are we just having a difference of agreement? Because we can always find reasons that the other person is wrong and we're right, but are we so staunch in our position that we are 100% right that we are unable to look at ourselves and unable to look at the other, that any other possibilities, and unable to look at compromise because we're like, no, I'm so right that it needs to be my way. And it's this ability to compromise, this ability to go, what is my part in this? How have I escalated this as well? That I think makes all the difference between healthy and unhealthy. Because someone who is very rigid and refuses to look at any other perspective and is so strong in their positioning that they're willing to hurt the other person to get their point across, I think
Mm,
that's where things get into that danger zone of like, this is becoming toxic and unhealthy. And we need both people to be able to at least hear out the other one in an open way without attacking, without shoving their opinion down their throat, to be able to kind of move forward in any way in a conflict situation. Yeah.
mm,
Does that answer your question?
totally. I think it's also really important for. I would love it if you could give us some of your personal experience as well. I know you mentioned you'd be open to chatting about one of your harder relationships, the last relationship from a couple of years ago, having to end your engagement. How did you get to that point where you recognized that that was what you had to do? When you're speaking, you just were mentioning about like rigidity. Can you help us understand how it actually looks when you're actually navigating through the decision to break a relationship off? How do you tell if it's the right decision?
Yeah, so it's a really tricky one to know, should I stay, should I go, right? It's entirely your decision. And I think a lot of people run around going, again, couples therapists are like, what do I do? Should I leave? And I'm like, I can't give you that answer. I can only give you kind of like work through with you what the pros and cons are, and then you get to decide. And I think it's a really tricky one. And in my personal experience, when I've had to kind of grapple with this question, because I did for like a year, I just could not make a decision because I was in just so much fear of like, what's going to happen if I leave, and like, what's my life going to be, and like, how much is too much of like working on things and how much is the right amount. Because obviously we always want to give it as much as we can in terms of navigating that conflict and working through it. And I'd gotten to the point where I tried everything in that relationship to fix the problems, and like I literally had nothing left, like I was done. um, and I kind of felt like it was very one-sided in the fact that I was very self-developmenty, and I was always finding a new thing we could try, or finding this or finding that, or analyzing myself and my patterns and what was going on and trying to explain that and explore that. And it kind of got to a point where I could kind of see things that were happening and the other person just couldn't. They didn't really have the same ability to be able to recognize what was going on. And so their understanding of that became, you're making it all up, or you're bringing things up that don't exist, and you're being over dramatic, or you're this, you're that. And it kind of was like, hang on a minute, no, this does exist here, but just because I haven't been able to communicate that to you in a certain way, I don't like, it's not ideal that you're shutting that down. Like, I want to be able to have those conversations. And I think some people are more open to doing the work of relationships and some people are less open. And I think there's also like how the capacity of a person, how much they can feel their emotions, how much they can go into that stuff and actually work through it. Or are they just projecting it out at someone else in front of them and blaming that person? Like, you're the one who pissed me off, so therefore, of course, I'm going to be mad. It's like, okay, but when you feel anger, like, is there a way that you can channel that that's not attacking someone else, that is like into something healthy, like, I don't know, a boxing class or something. And I think it's really tricky to know whether a person has capacity or not until you're in it, right? You don't know that just from like meeting someone for 5 minutes. It takes a few arguments a few times. I realized that a lot of our arguments ended up in like, oh, okay, we'll do this, we'll do that, and then things didn't actually change. It was said it was going to change, but it didn't change. It was kind of like fobbed off that like, I'm doing the best I can. That's enough. And also I had this intuitive knowing in my gut that like this wasn't right for me, but I just was like ignoring that and pretending it didn't exist and like going, no, don't be silly, like there's no logical basis behind this. I can't listen to that if there's no logic behind it. But there was just something that just kept pulling me back to like, is this right for me? Is this the right next step? Are you sure you want to do this kind of thing? Even though I was like suppressing it so hard. And I think it's important to listen to those intuitive nudges. I don't think we know how to do that as a society. We've never really been taught, what a female intuition is, or like how that exists, or how to even check in with your body around things, because often the body knows before the mind does. And I think this is so important when it comes to, choosing a life partner. Like, is all parts of me on board with this, or is my mind saying, oh, this is what I have to do because I'm 30 and it's time to get married and society tells me that this is the way to happiness? Or am I genuinely like very into this person and like I want to spend everything with them because all parts of me are just like, yes, this is just a huge yes for me.
Wow. Yeah, I think that you touched on something really important there, because it sounds like it's in relationships always you're kind of fighting you versus you. It's not always
Mm.
what you assume it to be, which is you versus them. It very much is you versus you in a match ring with your mirror, who's also them versus them. um,
Yeah,
can
there's
you
so
tell
much
me?
going on underneath the surface.
There's so much, and it can be so difficult and so blind. I feel like a lot of us go in blind, especially when it comes to relationships. We want to be in these relationships. We want to feel loved. We want to feel held. Um, and you're right. At the beginning, you mentioned like how many people are actually going to put their hand up for doing deep, personal development and deep personal work. Not a lot of
Mm,
people want to do that. Not a lot of people even recognize that that's a prerequisite to entering into a long-term sustainable relationship.
yeah.
So where do we go from here? How do you even navigate? Was it like when you ended your engagement? That must have been so difficult for you. Did you recognize it to be like the start of you doing everything completely different, or were you kind of blind as to what you would do after this?
Yeah, it was the hardest thing I've ever done, in that like a big part of myself had to die in letting it go as well. And I think that was that part of me that believed in like the fantasy fairy tale stuff, and that like I have to be this person in order to be, a worthwhile woman and have, a marriage and a baby and all of this. And there was a lot of that involved. And then so in the loss of all of that, it was like, okay, who am I now? Who am I without this relationship or this status that, women are taught to kind of desire and prescribe themselves to. And so I had to kind of like relearn who I was and what I wanted and what brought me joy. And I think it came back a lot back to when I was in it, was I feeling a lot of joy? And I wasn't. There was a lot of times where I was kind of putting my needs last, or, you know, putting up with things that weren't quite right. But, I was like, oh, but, there's other points of this person that's really great. So it balances out. It'll just be fine. I'll just deal with it, and never really choosing myself in what I really wanted or what I wanted to do. And so now being on the flip side of that, it's kind of like I've reevaluated my life of like, what is it I actually want and how can
Mm,
I make that happen? and how can I move forward on my goals and not let anything stand in the middle of it? Because it's so easy when you're in a relationship to kind of just go, oh, I want to move interstate, but my partner doesn't want to do that, so I'm just going to stay here and not do anything different, not rock the boat. Why cause a conflict, all that. But then there's those hopes and dreams of yours that never really get realized, and that can become resentment down the track as well. Of like, now I'm sad and I'm not happy here, but why is that? Oh, it's because of my partner, and that can cause more arguments and stuff too.
And this is a really big point because self-sacrifice, I think we often get confused with what loyalty means, what self-sacrifice means. Like do you really think there's anything to self-sacrificing before you actually truly know yourself and what you want?
I think self-sacrificing, that was my definition of love at the time, was like, love is, loving all the hard parts of someone as well as the good parts. Love is putting everything aside for them because I want to. And that's all well and good, until you wake up one day and you go, oh wow, like I haven't lived my life for me for the last 5 years, and now I'm really sad about that. And it's not progressing, and we're kind of stuck in this loop, and I can't get past that. And I think we do believe that love is self-sacrifice, particularly as women, but also men can do it as well. But like, we're just trained that putting your needs last is going to make you a good partner, and like making sure that they're all happy and everything's all good with them. And I think this is not necessarily the case. I think when we can kind of find that equilibrium, that balance of being able to actually speak what we want into this connection, and like share our vision for a relationship, and then what is their vision, and does that actually align, or are we trying to contort ourselves into their vision of what they want, because then that's the way to keep a healthy, happy relationship? Not necessarily. Are we being our true selves, or are we kind of being this perfect version of ourselves that we feel like we need to be in order to get love? And I think that was essentially it for me. It was like, if I self-sacrifice, if I self-abandon, that's how I've gotten love my entire life. That's how my parents treated me. That's how everyone's kind of given me that love. So I'm just going to continue doing that in my connections. But what happens when you self-abandon, whenever you say yes to someone and you actually mean no, where we think it's not a big deal. We're like, oh, I don't have to go through the conflict. Yeah, I'll just say yes, it'll be fine. But there's this little part of us that's listening, our inner child that's listening to us. And whenever we say yes to someone else and ignore our own needs, our inner child is being told essentially that their needs don't matter, they're not worthy, they're not worthwhile or lovable the way they are. They have to fit into this certain box in order to actually be loved. And I think we don't realize how much of an impact that actually has on our self-worth and our self-esteem and our happiness. Like, if we're constantly feeling like we have to be this perfect version of ourselves and give in and give more and more and more, people are going to take us for granted, and they're not going to value us, and they're not going to really know us, even what we want or what we're looking for in relationship. And if we're not looking after our own inner child and our own selves, like, no one else is going to.
You're right. No, I think you're right. What do you think is the cure to self-abandonment and self-sacrifice or self-betrayal? If you could pick one, from a coach perspective, one cure, you can only take one tool with you. How do we cure this self-betrayal, self-abandonment?
Huge question. I feel like this is like the how do you cure cancer question of therapy. Like, you can't say an answer, they will sue you. I feel like a lot of the core work that's been really profound for me has been parts work and working with my inner child, my inner teen, my adult self, like on all the different wounds that have come up at different ages. So I think going in and doing the work and talking to your inner child like it's a real person in front of you, because there are these little parts of ourselves that are broken off from trauma when we were younger, and it gets stuck in our body and it gets stuck in who we are. And then we end up in this argument with someone about something completely different, but it triggers our self-abandonment wound. And suddenly we're that 5-year-old all over again. We're exactly where we were. And we're having this argument as a 5-year-old, even though we're actually an adult in our real life. And I think going back and actually sitting with the inner part of you that has no like conditioning or hasn't been told a certain way to be, because the inner child will always be trying to do things to get love. And so you can go back and you can give yourself that love that that child's searching for. And I think that's the most important piece, is like, how can we actually hold ourselves in what we're going through? Because if we can hold ourselves, we're way less likely to lash out at our partner or expect our partner to save us or fix us. And I think that's the missing piece. Like, you don't see a lot of that in therapy, unfortunately, these days, or psychology. I've found a lot more of it in spirituality, and I'm trying to bring it back in and mesh the two. Because yes, it sounds crazy talking to your inner child. Like, of course, I can appreciate, like, we're a bit like, oh, when you first hear that the first time, but it can have really profound impacts. And I really want to make a reel as like, do you think you're not a parent? Well, surprise, you are. You're a parent of your inner child. You better go work on that.
You better go work on that. Jeez, Kiara, harsh. No cheating with the coach. This is such an important topic. While we're on this vein, I really want to. You've made me think of something I really need, and the audience probably needs some clarity on. I want to know what your perspective is about why people think that boundaries are the bad guy, and why having boundaries or being direct or being logical as a female energy, or maybe a more passive energy in the relationship, is deemed to be aggressive or too assertive or negative, like you're taking away from someone else. When I would ask you, would you say boundaries is pretty similar, or maybe even the same thing as desires and wants?
I would say it's different from desires and wants, for the fact that I can say I have a desire and a want, and if it isn't met, I'm fine. Whereas if I say I have a boundary just is more safety related in my brain. Like, I'm saying I really want you to look after me, versus I feel like I need to be looked after when I'm walking home alone at night, and I might ring you for that reason or something. And therefore, if a boundary is crossed, like, there's a feeling of like, I am not protected right now and I feel scared and unsafe. Whereas if a want and desire is crossed, like, it doesn't happen, like, it's not the end of the world, it's just disappointing. And then that's often where, like, you can get a lot of anger coming up when boundaries are crossed. And I don't think people realize the two, because that's the anger of our body trying to protect ourselves. And I think a lot of people don't know how to handle boundaries, particularly people who don't have their own boundaries, right? If someone walks in and expects, like, to kind of do everything for everyone and make sure it's harmonious, I think that people really struggle with boundaries because oftentimes in our family of origin, we haven't really been allowed to say no, or, fight back against a parent figure or something like that. And if we have, we've been kind of like disciplined or shamed or told, like, how dare you talk back to me, that kind of thing. And, like, often it's associated with love is people pleasing and just like pleasing and making sure everyone's okay. And then when we don't do that, there's this element of guilt. And I think when we set a boundary, often we can feel really guilty about it, or we can feel really scared, particularly when people take a negative kind of, like, don't take it well. I think this can be really, like, attacks our sense of identity, that we are a good girl and that we are a nice person and all of this, when really setting a boundary is just protecting yourself. It's just looking after who you are. And I kind of see it as like for an example, like, you could be a mum, right, who gives everything to her kids and never takes time off and always puts in 110%, and that's great, but you're going to be so burnt out by the end of that. And, like, maybe you just, like, put your kids in front of the TV and go, oh my gosh, I don't have capacity today. This is the best I can do. Or maybe you're a mum who goes to yoga like once a week, and, like, just carving out that 1 hour for just you, that boundary of, like, I need this hour for me, might feel really selfish in the moment, but what it's going to help you do is it's going to help you have longevity and not burn out as hard, so you can be consistent in your parenting. And maybe she's more active a parent when she comes back. Maybe she's more direct and focused with those kids. And I don't mean to shame anyone's parenting, but just, that's the way I see it, is like, we see boundaries as such a, like, shameful thing, but really it's protecting us so that we can be more consistent long term, so we can be more loving long term, so we can feel safe and held and nurtured, and then give back to the people around us without being taken advantage of, or burned out or used. So I think it's super important skill to have. I think when you don't have boundaries, it does open you up to a lot of, like, people taking too much from you or asking too much of you, or just, yeah, like you'll say yes to all these things you don't actually want to do. And the way I could really tell I was doing that was this level of resentment that would come up, and I'd get frustrated and I'd just be like, oh, and I know I'm not an angry person. So I was like, where is this coming from? And it's like, oh, it's that level of resentment is my body's way of saying, no, we didn't actually want to do this, but now we are because you said yes. And I think that's really important to note before going into something like trying to set a boundary.
Yeah, the self-abandonment catches up. And abandonment is such a harsh word. But
Mm,
when we see all these people with abandonment issues, causing them to feel more like anxiously attached or avoidantly attached, would you
yeah.
say that a lot of the times, because I recall in your podcast you mentioned your childhood was peaceful, you had great parents, good example of parents, and you had a happy childhood, so you don't know where this abandonment wound came from. Would you
Mm.
reckon that for a lot of people the abandonment wound is from self-abandonment, just from the way our society works?
Yeah, I would definitely say that that's a big part of it. Like when you're self abandoning all the time, like I said, there's that rhetoric that you don't deserve your needs to be met or your feelings to be heard. And so, like, you're not as important as everyone else is, kind of thing. And that does have a part to play and an impact on you. And I think, yes, I had an idyllic childhood in some aspects, but there was a lot of like modeling other people also not putting their needs first. And like I come from an Italian heritage where it's like women are in the kitchen doing everything for the family and just putting all of their energy into like supporting the family and doing all of this. And I come from a strong lineage of women, but no one really had any boundaries or knew how to say no without like significant guilt coming up for them, or like shame or fear, or, you know, a lot of those big ones, because, there was this rhetoric of what will people think of us if we're not doing all the things and helping all the people and doing all of that. And so that kind of, I just sponged all of that and took that into my personal life moving forward and into my relationships, and found myself just getting so exhausted and so drained, and being like I remember being 20. I was like 20 years old and I was like, I need to have a nap. And I'm like, why am I 20 and I need a nap in the middle of the day? Like, this is
Need
not
a little
normal.
granny nap. Yeah.
Yeah, right? Like
I
if
totally
I was
come
like
across that.
80
Yeah.
maybe.
Yes, exactly right. That's
But it was
actually
because
really
I didn't have boundaries and I was just giving all my energy away. Like, yeah.
totally. Boundaries protect your energy. I've heard that, and that's true. Boundaries are there to protect your energy. Well, that's actually so interesting that you're mentioning your family as well and your background, your culture, because I was wondering, they don't teach you this kind of stuff at school, right? They don't
No.
teach you this kind of stuff at work. Um, and if your family wasn't lucky enough to have these kinds of skills in their tool belt,
Yeah.
emotional regulation, boundary setting, secure attachments, how are we supposed to understand how this works? What's your perspective when you're looking at your work on the larger scale, and we're looking at society and we're looking at early intervention? What is going on in our society, in your opinion? And what should we be doing about this? Should we be revolutionizing the way we work our systems or educate our youth, or what's your perspective on that?
That's a big one. I do think like this stuff should be taught in schools. I don't know why it's not taught in schools. I think we've only just started catching up on like respectful relationship education in schools and things like that. And it's like optional, it's not mandatory, which is really disappointing. Yeah.
The people who most need it will not be at class.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, right. And even like I had to go on such a journey to learn boundaries. Like it took me years, and it took me like baby steps. And like I finally was like, okay, I'm gonna set a boundary. And I'd set it, and then someone would like push back and I'd like fold immediately. And I was like,
Oh
okay,
yeah.
back to the drawing board. Like so it took a long time to get to where I am now. And I think that's why I'm running the workshops I run. I run a boundaries workshop because I'm like, this needs to be out and about. This needs to be out in the world. No one knows it exists, and people are suffering and they don't know why they're suffering, and they don't know why they're saying yes and being exhausted and having naps when they're 20 all the time. Um, and I think, yeah, we just don't have that. I mean, we're getting better at like the kind of psychology, emotional intelligence kind of literature, and kind of getting our heads around that a bit more than what we used to. But I just still think it's very shamed, and it's very like, oh, you can't be crying, right now, or you can't be doing this, or you can't be saying no, or you can't be choosing yourself. Like, I think it's so it's so hard in a society that tells us that we're not allowed to be broken, we're not allowed to be, emotional, and just shuts us down because that's all we've ever known from our parents and our families as well. Like they're doing the best they could with what they had because they probably went through the same kind of parenting style, but it's just so suppressing. And then this is where all these problems seem to come up, is like in our relationships down the track. It's like I see it as another chance to kind of heal that wound that didn't get healed when you were younger. And yeah, like depending on your partner and depending on who you are, and like how well that kind of goes down, and whether you heal it or whether it continues on.
Yeah. That's a big one. I think that definitely I agree with you. I think you're right. It should be in schools. And I love that you're running a workshop for boundaries. I think that's lovely. And you're doing your part to kind of help spread education about this. How do you reckon you are feeling? Well, how do you reckon maturity? This is just maturity. Like if we all have to grow up and we all don't have the answers, we all got to kind of self-discover and realize what's the cause of our pain. Do you feel like this is a common journey for individuals? This is just a part of growing up and maturing, or do you think there is a bit of a gap in our understanding of how we relate to each other and connect to each other?
I think there's definitely a gap. I think there's more we could be doing. There's so much we don't know, and there's so much we're walking in blind about. And I think that that's the journey, right? You're going to walk into relationships and there's going to be so much you learn about yourself from every single one. Like whether it's a good relationship, whether it's a bad relationship, there's always something you can grow from. And I think that's a really good goal to have, of like, how can I grow from this scenario and not end up in the same or similar scenario next time around? And that's what I really like to help people with, is like breaking those patterns when they find that they might leave the relationship, but then they meet a new person and a very similar thing happens again, even though it's a different person.
Yeah.
I think that's one of your biggest ways to like find out what your wounds are, is like, oh, why do I keep like attracting people who are like non-committal or never want to give me a relationship, or are abusive, or like whatever it is. Like ask yourself the question, like, what is my type that I keep attracting that I don't want to be attracting? And then you can map that back to like flip it on, like, what is it that the wound within you is kind of like being drawn to that for some reason.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really good way to start, because we don't know where to start with this stuff. It's like, where do we start? Oh my God, there's so much going on there. And I think start with what's in front of you right now. Like start with what's present and what's bringing you sadness, what you're struggling with, what you're finding you can't connect with people and is getting in the way of moving you forward. And I think if we can take on this self-development mindset of like, how can I recognize and own my own stuff, then that's going to change the world, right? If everyone, like, not everyone has to do that, not everyone will do that, but like if 50% of people are open to like talking through their stuff, going to therapy, like having these conversations, like having an argument with someone and then being like, what could I have done differently? What could I have done better in that scenario that would have maybe helped shift that from where it ended, where it landed? Whether that be asking yourself that question, or if you feel safe enough asking the person, or even a third party, if there's like a roommate or someone who's around as well, like asking them, like, what do you think? Like, could I have handled that differently?
Yeah.
And just being open to that response without feeling like it's abject criticism and you're like going on a spiral, because it's like self-reflection is great, but self-criticism kind of ends up in a bit of a loop that we don't want to end up on.
Yeah.
And there's a very fine line, slippery slope between the two. Yeah, yeah. And often it can be really good to get support with this stuff when you first start as well, so that you're not alone. And like, I've been to therapists for years and that kind of thing. Like I haven't done all of it alone, no way. Particularly when things felt really overwhelming or really big. But just asking yourself those questions to start, I think, is really important, and that's going to be that's going to make all the difference. And then when you attract someone who also has that mindset of like, how can they reflect on their things and work through their wounds as well, that's going to help you really have a healthy relationship, because you're both going to be able to bring both of what you've healed to the relationship, but also that mindset to you guys' arguments, because there's things you can learn alone, and then there's things you can only learn in a couple, in a relationship. And so there's always going to be new challenges that are popping up, regardless of whether you're single or whether you're not. And it's just like, do we take the time to actually sit with those, or do we just move on? Because we live in such a fast-paced world. If you're at work or something and you get triggered, you're probably not going to sit there and cry about it for 2 hours at work, right? So again, comes back to like, something triggered me at work. I need to keep working, so I'm going to like compartmentalize it for now. But what can I do when I get home from work to actually go back to that, even though it felt gross and I don't really want to go back to it? How can I sit with that, journal on it? I like to do burn ceremonies where I
It's
throw
fun.
the things I'm really struggling with into the fire to like feel like a visceral release of that. Like it just feels
Yeah,
nice to burn it away. Um, yeah, and what can I learn about myself in this process so that when it does happen again, or if it does happen again, I'm kind of like, oh, there's that wound around, feeling criticized, or when that person said that thing to me, or like there's that again, that's that old thing, instead of taking it so personal that we're in like big distress about it kind of thing.
totally. I hear what you're saying, but if it's not too personal to ask, I'd love to kind
Yep.
of see, would you be willing to talk us through how you faced one of your biggest fears when you left your engagement? And I know you mentioned that one of the biggest fears was to be alone at 30.
Mm,
And I think that's a really relatable fear for a lot of us, especially with this idea going around that we're running out of time and our eggs are going to dry up. We're not going to have babies. We're going to
yeah.
die alone. Like these fears are really big. And it's really nice to hear that we can relate to, like some of us will be able to relate to you on this. Can you help us walk through basically what we were just talking about, but from the example of what you've walked through and what you've experienced from identifying the fear, recognizing that could have been a reason why you were holding on to something that wasn't for you, and then how
Yeah.
you actually go about self-reflecting to a point where you can let it go, and then how you make sure you don't pick the same type of partner out of fear again.
Yeah, yeah. Like it can be so hard to do, right? Like it's not an easy thing when we've been programmed that, that we're running out of time, we need someone now, like all of this. And that was one of the hardest parts for me, was like sitting with that feeling. And I think that it comes in multiple layers. So my spiritual side is really helpful here because I can always tap into like my guides or my higher self, or just like my inner knowing, my body's inner knowing. And being able to check in with that is really helpful when I'm freaking out about something. Because when I'm in my mind of like, oh my God, it's never going to happen for me. What have I done? I'm regretting this, da, 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 da. Like coming back to that sense of self, coming back to that inner knowing of like, I made the right decision for me. And I just feel it. So being able to connect with that is really important. And I think that's something that people struggle with or don't know how to do, or might sound too woo woo for you. So that's fine if it is. The second
Right up
part
my
would
alley.
be, pardon?
Right up my alley.
Yeah. And there's things you can do on like meditations you can do on YouTube, or you can just say like, I want to call in my higher self right now, and then do some journaling and just see what kind, like talk, like write questions and just see what answers come back. Like there's little things you can do that if you have enough self-trust of like, I'm not crazy right now, I'm just going to write it and see what happens and like see what comes back. Like oftentimes if you're open, like the world is your oyster and a lot more things will come back, a lot more signs and synchronicities. It's just whether you can get past that judgment piece around like, this is weird, which is so fine if that's where you're at. You don't have to do that part. That's just an optional extra that really supports me when
Take
I'm
a
really
leap of
freaking out
faith.
about things.
Yeah, take a
Yeah.
leap of faith. Give it
Yeah.
a try. What's the worst that could happen?
So the next part would be sitting with that part of yourself. So sitting with that loneliness part of you, and just asking it what message it has for you. So again, you can journal this. You can imagine it's in front of you and have an imaginary conversation. Because oftentimes these big dark emotions have been so suppressed and we've never actually given them the time or space to actually hear them out. So oftentimes they'll have a message, they'll say why they're there and what they're coming up for, and like maybe what they're afraid of. And then you can ask them what they need in order to feel safe or in order to feel held by you. And you can be that person that looks after them, right? And they'll give you an answer. Like they'll always want to talk to you because they're so suppressed. Oftentimes it's like even exciting for them to even just get a voice for a minute. And I find that really beneficial, not only in fully understanding myself, but being able to um, hold space for myself and the parts of me that I usually suppress, particularly the hard ones. So I think that's really important. And then again, that inner child piece about like, what is this? Is this really about being chosen, or is this really about feeling lovable? Or like, what is this really about? Going to our inner child, talking them through what's going on for them and how to best support them, I think is really important as well. And just finding joy in your life again, like what lights you up, what brings you joy, what would you like to do? And of course, the temptation to jump into another relationship is always going to be there. And there's nothing wrong with if you jump, if you do. Um, but I just know in myself, like I'd rather work through what the wound is so that I'm not jumping into a relationship just to feel that need, and rather I'm solid and steady within myself. I'm happy in my own life. I've built a beautiful life around me as a single person. And so when someone comes in, they're just adding to that. They're not like fixing that kind of thing. Because if
Yeah.
that's the basis I'm starting from, I'm not sure if we're going to get very far. Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I hope anyone who's listening, if you do give this a try, I hope it's helpful because I know that I have tried this myself and it definitely works. And I definitely advocate for this. And I think there is some sort of crazy mystery about that inner child that really does actually speak back just as much
Mm.
as the inner critics. They
Yeah.
speak back. It's like these like little pieces, these little voices, they all kind of have their own minds to it. Um, so thank you so much for speaking on that, Kiara. I know that'll be really helpful. If you could say, as a relationship coach and as a person who's done the hard work themselves and it continues to do the hard work because it is a journey, a lifelong journey,
Mm.
if you could say one thing to anyone listening right now who might be struggling with a relationship, past, present, or future, dealing with future as in like that longing for something or wanting something, what advice would you give?
I just want to give people a permission slip of like, it's okay to say no, and it's okay to, break it off, even if you are 30 and you're like terrified of the unknown in that. Like, it's okay to choose yourself if you know it's not right for you, and that you don't have to do the path that's been laid out by society. You don't have to follow what they've told you have to do. Even if it feels like you're being selfish or you might hurt people, like it's like at the end of the day, your joy is the most important and your joy is paramount. And you never know what's going to happen on the other side of that timeline. Like you might go down the marriage path and it might go bad, or you might go down the single path and it might actually go a lot better than what you thought it would. And yeah, I think we're often so wrapped up in our worst case scenario thinking and so hard on ourselves that we just kind of give everyone the world and not ourselves. And you deserve that love just as much as anyone else does. Like you deserve your joy just as much as anyone else does. So I just want to put that out there and hope that someone lands with that.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much. And if people want to find you online or work with you, Kiara, where can they find you?
Yeah, on Instagram, I'm Kiara Jade Relationships. And then I've got a link to all my other things on my link tree there. So, yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.